everybody. It's, I think, the last lecture, so I hope I will not make you tired for all these contributions. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more. I'm going to talk mostly about green. It's different than ecology, actually, because that would have been more complex, but I will try to bring that on. I will try to make in particular a connection between the use of green in urban design and health, resilience, and climate-related goals. Because that's the background of my my section. It's a little bit slow because I'm learning this too soon. But you might know that we are thinking in our section of environment about metabolisms of the areas, but also on urban environments. And the third, perhaps a little bit less known, which I will show you today, is about renewable design. So from an environmental perspective, looking at goals to achieve more, let's say, to improve the ecology, to improve living place and space in areas, for mostly habitats of, let's say, people and nature. So we do so from a perspective of biophilic design. The most important aspect of biophilic design is, let's say, use of direct nature and indirect nature, but also about space and place conditions. And those are the key concepts. It's about reciprocity between people and nature. And well, like I said, multi-scalar perspective. And we should not forget, why do we want to, let's say, achieve social-ecological urbanism? That's because of health and well-being of its users, including animals, so including nature, but for most, those will be the main goals. In our case, we also, to achieve those goals in the end, we need, let's say, to address climate adaptation challenges, nature inclusiveness, livability, climate, metabolism perspectives as well. What he introduced as well to this concept, and you saw that already in Rob's presentation, didn't appreciate as such, but the notion of liminal space. And liminal space is actually this in-between areas, these areas of, let's say, thresholds between two different spaces, and sometimes being perceived very discomfort, very uncomfortable. You can also use liminal space, and let's say this interaction between nature and people, between nature and culture, as a starting point for urban design, for design in general. And that's actually what I'm going to tell you also about today. Let's see. So this in-betweenness is where actually the two worlds will meet. But you might ask, still, why should I do it? And to what extent do you need to introduce these kinds of encounters with nature? If you want to achieve health and well-being, we see a lot of, we saw it today as well, see a lot of images with green, just green facades, green tree plants. Even in buildings, this is not urban design, no. But I wanted to show you this for another reason. This is in Vietnam. Beautiful architect's office with green in the facade integrated, as you can see. But then, is that social-ecological architecture? Because, for instance, or is it social-ecological urbanism? Because look outside, the fences. It is about interaction. So green, just introducing green is not, let's say, the solution. It's also about how do you interact between those qualities, between those values, and in particular, how can we improve it? Because, well, I just heard in the former discussions that we are too academic, but well, I'm afraid I will be in a while a little bit more academic. Also, green often is, let's say, underestimated. People think we just add green. In this case, this Chinese project, all apartments were sold. It was 2000, but 70% were not able to live in the apartments because of huge pest problems. Introducing trees brings nature, yes. And nature brings bugs and all kinds of problems, and they just underestimated it, and the whole project failed. So I think it's also very important to be aware of this. It's not just a kind of greenwashing, literally, it's also about the integration and interaction. So it's about the translation of other values to our liminal spaces, and one of our key liminal spaces in urban design is the living public environment. It's a public space, and that's also where people, let's say, people interact. It's also about ownership of those environments, giving space back to people. We saw a couple of examples by how to include people in, let's say, in the development and the design of those areas. But it's also about the other challenges also mentioned by Rietke about integration, mobility integration. Well, this is really slow because this is Zoom. There's one bike ride to the Pijp in Amsterdam, and I'm not sure why you don't hear. Well, we have a few, but I like especially the sound. You can hear the birds. You can hear really the species in this area, and it is really important because before you can imagine these were all parking places. But this was actually the retrieval of mobility of these parking places made it possible to create a bit more nature, terraces, room for bikes, and immediately you hear it. You bike through the neighborhoods, you hear people speaking, of course, but also you hear birds. Not heard them before. So the sound you will it's some other time you will have to see. The other aspect also mentioned by Rietke is climate adaptiveness. And I think this is also one of the key, let's say, functions for reintegration in cities and urban design. And I think we are going to move towards this kind of more encounters between nature and our own field of design. And it's more than parks. So it's adding green, yes, for sure, but it's also about adding green with these functionalities. So I was wondering, and then we come a little bit more to the academic questions, of course, these functionalities, and for instance, the water park, you all know, and in Rotterdam, which is being used for all kinds of for sports, basketball, skateboarding, but also for events. But of course, has a role from a climate adaptive perspective. The resilience of Rotterdam, to speed rain discharge moments where it actually stores water. And avoids, let's say, water to flood the streets. And this is, let's say, done throughout Rotterdam and some other examples from New York. And so in the end, I think what we can call it nature, we can call it ecology, but in the end, of course, it's created nature, created ecology with a certain goal. And in the field I'm working in, the goal is often related to environmental challenges. And that is climate, it's about water conservation, about storage, it's about lowering temperatures, also about health and well-being. You have been perhaps on the roofs past summer, on the roof program week, the roof week, the rooftop landscapes which were created. And here you also could see, let's say, the value of public areas of liminal space which we don't use yet optimally. And one of our graduate students last year, together with Rins and me, and myself as tutors, we tried to make a program to, let's say, with nature, with water storage, with social aspects, to add kind of decision scheme, how you could transform the entire, let's say, roof landscape of Rotterdam. So all kinds of elements which you put all together based on a decision scheme, and I'm going to run you through it. But you can actually, for each place, you can see the type of space, the service, the location, quality of the building, very ownership, access, and social aspects. What could lead to which kind of roof coping, which in the end would define the way, let's say, the opportunities for nature to include in those areas. And so you have the before and the after. I think this was a very valuable study. Also, there's a lot of space in the Netherlands, but also beyond, what we call wastegapes, which are areas which we underestimate, and which are very valuable for the place of, for this interaction between people and nature. And I think there's this, if I may say so, there's an interesting publication we published last February, so February last year, in which we also elaborated with several of our colleagues here at the department on, the concept of regenerative therapies. And the wastecape chapter actually just won a prize. But finding these lost public spaces still leaves us with one question. So why should we try to find these kind of lost public spaces? Why should we introduce this green? I mean, you all say, everybody is agreeing on the concept of that green would add value to your life. That it would add value to, well, perhaps even to money value to let's say, the dwelling. So, but still the question is, how can you secure in an academic way how much green or what place would add the maximum benefits for health and well-being? So that's where one of the projects I would like to show you a bit more in detail comes in, which is a European project in which we, together with a PhD, together with a professor, tutor, in which we try to see, let's say, the correlation between green in urban spaces and place to health and well-being. And we do so also with the health specialists from the Erasmus Medical Center. It's not just, let's say, kind of a hypothesis perspective, it's really evidence-based. We try to really correlate, let's say, people with nature, with green, and towards health and well-being. And what you could say is to help, and if you look at about literature, I mean, we all know that air pollution, noise, annoyance, thermal comfort related to, for instance, hard surfaces. But also odors, they affect, let's say, what we call one part of health, which we have to mitigate, of course. It's a negative aspect which we would like to reduce. But then there's this kind of perceived aspect. So emotional well-being, social well-being, and psychological well-being, which you could call, which you need to restore for restoration purposes. It's often used in the psychology places. And finally, there's another perspective of green, which is actually the physical activity, which is related to the amount, the kind of activity, but also social aspects come in here. And this is often related to what we call instauration. What is important is that we in our field actually make the mistake that we call everything green and we relate everything to green. But there's a difference. But mitigation is about greenness, restoration is about the natural environment, and instauration is about green space. And what we do as designers often do is also, let's say, in academia, we put them all together. And we particularly make this division together with the specialists from the health specialists from the Erasmus Hospital, because it's based on literature and findings which really could relate indicators to this to health. So what does it mean for urban design? It is about, you would like to know as a designer how you as a person, and the little person in the right the drawing, how you are surrounded by vegetation. For restoration, how you are surrounded by nature. It's another notion, as I said before. And how you can access green spaces. These are different notions. It's very important to make this distinction. So what we did is actually we made this kind of preferred reporting items, which is meant to help you as designers of what to do based on data and how to come to your solutions. I'm not going to explain it because we just simply lack the information. Let's at the time explain it into depth. We go through these 22 different data aspects you can run through, and you can combine them in this model, in this checklist. And based on the data, and here it's more or less more specifically, and I will share a PDF so you can read it there. This is from a publication just submitted last month, where you can actually look at, let's say, the different aspects of like spatial assessment, what you should do to really get this greenness in space and access to nature assessed, and how that would lead to, in the end, to your design, how you can support your design decisions in an area. And this is often based because, well, I mentioned it before, because nature often is just it's used as kind of a disguise. You just add green to the surface, be it the skin, building skin, be it the surface of the roof, the building, or be it the streets, and that would lead to more health, more well-being. It's not that simple. These indicators we indicated here, those are directly related to health benefits. But then the next step, of course, how should you assess? So how can you assess greenness? How can you assess what you call network distance? But also spatially, so the amount of green covered space, accessibility of this green infrastructure, and its use. Right? So how dense and how diverse is it? Of course, it's also an individual green space. And this altogether actually builds, let's say, the health benefits of us as users in the urban space. To make it even more complex, in this urban space, this is just an example from Denmark. We did it for Denmark, for Portugal, for Croatia, and Czechoslovakia, and for the Netherlands. But here's an example from Denmark. You see there's all kinds of biases. What I showed you here is on the left you see Google Maps, on the right you see Urban Atlas, bottom left you see OpenStreetMap, and this is an expert map. If you set that expert map, that's actually the real assessment of green. You have to walk really literally through the area, but you can tell that if you use the other data sets, and I think it was mentioned in the discussion of what data you use, you get entirely wrong, let's say, assessments of the amount of space of green. This is why sometimes we can be very curious, very say, surprised by the outcomes of that Eindhoven city is being called the most green city of the Netherlands. Or, well, these rankings they split every time. It's because we misinterpret the amount of green in urban areas. And so, for instance, you have public ownership bias. This is a public school. Yeah? This is noted automatically as green. It is not, because it's not accessible. The same goes for sports fields and so forth. So all this together actually is important to make, let's say, to include in your assessment how to include and change the amount of green integrated in your plans. As I said, this is something you can read afterwards, but I think it's very important because it tries to really include the personal context, the local context of the city, and the global context. And it also includes, let's say, what is your desired outcome of health? Right? Is it respiratory health? Is it about stress? Is it the restoration part? Or it's about instauration, the physical activity? Would you like green to be accessible? I think this is very important that you make that kind of goals you would like to achieve. Now I go very fast because there's a lack of time to a couple of other projects running in our section. This is biophilic, a joint project with MIT they are doing. And this is actually looking at the different climate zones and different biomes. So we look at Barcelona, Singapore, and Amsterdam, and we look at, okay, what does it mean for integration of nature for these different climates? You can imagine, and you probably know the examples from Singapore because it's a hot, humid climate. It's just beautiful for integration of green, even in places where you would never be able to grow green animals. So we try to learn from that lessons towards morphology, towards, let's say, how you could integrate to a maximum really into the policy. Another project finished already is Daniela Mayulari in our section, also working in landscape architecture. She's going to defend her PhD the 10th of March. Here we look actually to the relation of climate to, say, the relation of green and morphology of cities to the climate, and this so to energy use of buildings, urban areas to transport. I think that's also something underestimated for green. In the Green Blue Cities project by Tanea, who's also working now in urban design, we looked at actually how we could actually green infrastructure design can be used for urban stormwater management, and how this should be implemented in such a way that this would be, because we always hear claim that everything should be nature-based, but in reality, of course, it's often hybrid. This gray, green, blue. This is this project is about. And in iSurf project also with AMS, by the way, by Claudio Fornacci, also in urban design now working, we did before, let's say, look at riverfronts and how to make use of, let's say, interesting instruments, how to design, let's say, urban riverfronts, or how to redesign urban riverfronts, because they're often very, let's say, many cities in the past decades were the backsides to the rivers. And finally, we are now doing, say, a study with artists in Amsterdam and with Hortus in Amsterdam to look at how these green spaces in the Bergheim Park, which is also there, how they can be based more on the use of rainwater. We would say, well, they are open green areas. No, but actually they are using a lot, and this is really about 3 million cubic meters of drinking water to, let's say, grow their plants and to also have their animals as artists. So that's also where we try to introduce natural processes to base it all on rainwater harvesting. So this is a slide I put in because I was in the discussion. There was a discussion before the discussion. There was this question about inclusiveness. It was not originally my presentation, but I thought I would throw it in because what is often, that was what was being told by Stefan, we often stay here in the lowest part of the participation level, the participation level of Einstein in a simplified way. But while most of new projects aim a little bit more to doing and engaging people at participation, but real examples like Princess Sleeper was shown in this park, it's about doing with people. And, often, I must say, participation is really claimed, stuck in this lower level of the understanding level. An example where we did, and that's my final part, is in the Living Lab in Keuvel, also with AMS, with metabolic and others involved. And this actually brings together this social-ecological perspective, where you actually do things with people. So an equal reciprocal partnership, but also aiming to use wastes, because this was a wastegate, polluted area. And actually, it also has been used to, let's say, phytoremediate, and still is, because phytoremediation is being claimed to be very effective. It is. It takes 30 years to clean such soils. So we're now 15 years more or less, but after 30 years, you can clean those kinds of heavily polluted grounds, and not everything. And of course, doing it with people, like I said before. So just to wrap up with some images and some values, which were in my presentation, I think social ecological urbanism is about value of people and place. Not just space, but it's also about place. It's also about the value of natural systems, as I've shown you just before with the example from Amsterdam, from Keuvel, but also the other examples before. It's about, this is an example, what we are realizing now. So sustainability and circularity, I did not address that a lot, but I think it's very important that you can use it more, let's say, green can be used in an active way to sustainable goals. And it's about climate adaptiveness, which I showed you, of course, as well, as did this is a very important goal we should make use of in this kind of combined approach. And finally, which is often forgotten, I think nature still is culture in cities. So you can still use it for what we call the instauration. So to meet, people can meet in areas, they can sport, they can walk, and this is also often forgotten. And this is the value of culture and station and sport, whatever you call it. And finally, this is informality. It's also important that the informality, leaving it as is, that's also a value we should not forget about. I hope this is more or less the wrap up. So what we try to do is really based on evidence to secure health and well-being, to know how that leads to your elaboration as a designer, and to do so in such a way that it really is, let's say, in this liminal space between humans and nature, between, let's say, culture and nature. And